She got pregnant by a stranger, then discovered he's a billionaire luxury hotel tycoon. A very powerful story, but before proceeding, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. I love Mr. Peter. Let's start with love. The champagne had stopped flowing hours ago, but Tavisha Leslie's world was still spinning when she found herself pressed against the penthouse window overlooking the city she could never afford. Kissing a man whose last name she hadn't bothered to learn. Monaco stretched below them like scattered diamonds on black velvet, and somewhere in the ballroom behind them, her best friend Nia was dancing with her new husband, probably wondering where her maid of honor had disappeared to. Tavisha should care about that, should care about a lot of things. But this man's hands were in her hair, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something besides exhaustion. "We should go back," she whispered against his mouth. Not meaning it at all. "We should," he agreed, pulling her closer instead. His name was Trent, just Trent. He'd told her that when they'd collided earlier, literally collided, her champagne flute shattering against his chest as she'd rounded a corner too fast, late for her maid of honor speech. She'd been mortified, apologizing while dabbing at his soaked shirt with cocktail napkins. He'd laughed, really laughed, and said it was the best thing that had happened to him in months, and "Let me buy you another drink," he'd offered. "You're the one covered in champagne," she'd pointed out. "Then let me buy you a drink while covered in champagne." It'll be a conversation piece. She'd meant to stay for one drink, just one. She had an early flight back to Detroit, back to the hospital, back to her real life of 70-hour weeks, and an apartment so small she could touch both walls of her bedroom with outstretched arms. This wedding had been a beautiful escape, a weekend of pretending she belonged in places with marble floors and waiters in white gloves. But Trent had made her laugh, really laugh, until her stomach hurt and mascara smudged beneath her eyes. They talked on the terrace while the party raged inside, and somewhere between midnight and dawn, she'd told him things she never told anyone. About growing up in Detroit's foster system, moving between houses like unwanted furniture. About medical school loans that would take her entire life to repay. About the little girl who'd learned early that safety was something you built yourself, brick by careful brick, because no one was coming to save you. "I was 7 when my mother dropped me at social services," she'd said, surprised at her own honesty. "Just walked me in, signed some papers and left. I waited by the window for 3 days, thinking she'd come back. She never did." "I'm sorry," Trent had said, and meant it. "Don't be. I survived. 13 foster homes before I aged out. Some were okay. Some weren't, but I learned to rely on myself, to build walls high enough that people couldn't hurt me when they inevitably left. That sounds lonely. Lonely is safer than disappointed." He'd listened with an intensity that made her feel seen, really seen, for the first time in her life. And then he told her his own truth, about a father who measured love in quarterly earnings, about a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt like drowning, about the weight of expectations he never asked to carry. "I don't even know who I am without all of it," he'd admitted, staring at his hands. "The name, the expectations, the future that was decided before I could walk. Sometimes I think I'm just a collection of other people's requirements. Like if you stripped away everything external, there'd be nothing left." "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard," Tavisha had said softly. "Yeah." He'd smiled, but it hadn't reached his eyes. "Yeah, it is." She'd kissed him first, leaned across the space between them, and pressed her lips to his, tasting champagne and honesty and something she couldn't name. He'd frozen for half a heartbeat, then kissed her back like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. The conversation had continued between kisses, between stolen moments of connection that felt dangerous and necessary. "What would you do if you could be anyone?" she'd asked. "I don't know. Maybe run a small hotel somewhere quiet. Actually know my guests' names. Care about their experience instead of profit margins?" He'd laughed at himself. "That probably sounds ridiculous. It sounds human." "That's not ridiculous. What about you? If you could have anything?" I already have what I want." "I'm a surgeon. I fix hearts. That's real. That matters. She'd paused. But sometimes I wish I had someone to come home to. Someone who'd listen to my day and care about the answer. That probably sounds weak. It sounds honest. And you're the least weak person I've ever met. Now, in the penthouse suite he'd somehow acquired, she let herself be reckless. Let herself be the woman who had one perfect night with a beautiful stranger, who didn't think about consequences or morning flights or the reality waiting back home. His touch was reverent, like she was something precious, and when he whispered her name against her skin, it sounded like a prayer. They talked between moments of intimacy, about dreams they'd abandoned, about the people they wished they could be, about the strange magic of meeting someone who understood without judgment. I don't want this to end, he'd murmured against her shoulder. Everything ends. That's what makes it beautiful. Stay, he murmured as dawn crept through the windows, his arms wrapped around her. Just a little longer. But Havisha had learned young that beautiful things didn't last. That Cinderella stories were fairy tales, and real life was an alarm clock and responsibilities and walls you built high enough that nothing could hurt you. I have to go, she said, already pulling away, already rebuilding her armor. Then let me get your number. Let me see you again. Let me take you to dinner somewhere normal, where we can figure out if this is real outside of Monaco magic. She smiled, sad and knowing. This was perfect because it doesn't have a second chapter. Let's not ruin it with reality. Havisha, thank you, she interrupted, meaning it with her whole heart. For tonight, for making me feel human instead of just tired, for seeing me as more than just another person trying to survive. She dressed quickly, efficiently. The surgical precision she used in operating rooms applied to leaving before her heart could get more involved than it already was. He watched her with something desperate in his eyes, like he wanted to argue, to convince her to stay, but understood that she'd already made her choice. At the door, she turned back. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, shirtless and beautiful, and heartbreakingly real. I hope you figure out who you are, she said quietly, without all the rest of it. I think you'd like that person. I hope you let someone in, he replied. Before those walls get so high you can't climb out. The words hit harder than they should have. She left before she could change her mind, taking the elevator down to the lobby where the real world waited. The wedding was over. The fairy tale was done. She had a plane to catch and a life to return to. On the flight home, squeezed into a middle seat between a snoring businessman and a young mother with a crying baby, Havisha told herself it had been one perfect night, a memory to hold on to during brutal shifts and endless emergencies. She'd go back to Detroit, back to the hospital, back to building her career one careful brick at a time. She almost believed it. When she found the note weeks later, tucked into her maid of honor, clutch that she hadn't opened since Monaco, her hands trembled as she read his words. You made me remember what it feels like to be human. Thank you. No number, no last name. Just those words and a truth that made her chest ache. She tucked the note into her nightstand drawer and went back to work. Back to normal. Back to the life she understood. Then came the morning she couldn't keep breakfast down. The morning her hands shook during a routine consultation. The morning she stared at 2 pink lines on a plastic stick and felt her entire carefully constructed world begin to crack. So, morning, she realized one perfect night had consequences that would change everything. Chapter 2. The Revelation. Havisha sat in the ultrasound room with Nia gripping her hand hard enough to cut off circulation, staring at the screen like it might suddenly make sense if she looked long enough. Twins, the technician repeated, smiling like this was wonderful news. 2 healthy heartbeats. Congratulations. Twins, Havisha echoed flatly. 1 baby was already impossible. 2 was beyond comprehension. Can you give us a moment? Nia asked, her voice tight. The technician nodded, leaving them alone with the images frozen on the screen. 2 tiny flickering beings that were apparently going to become human beings. Havisha's human beings. In roughly 7 months. Okay, Nia said, switching into crisis management mode. Okay, we can work with this. First thing, we need to find him. What was his last name? I don't know. His number? Didn't get it. Social media? Email? Literally anything. Havitsia shook her head, feeling stupid and reckless and terrified. We didn't want real life involved. That was the whole point. Well, real life is very involved now. Nia stood, pacing the small room. He was at my wedding. Someone must know him. Maybe David's company connections. Stop. Havitsia pressed her palms to her eyes. Just stop. I'm not chasing down some man I spent one night with and demanding he take responsibility for my choices. I chose to sleep with him. I chose not to get his information. This is my situation to handle. Your situation. V, those are his children too. He doesn't know that. He'll never know that. She stood, pulling her jacket on with sharp, angry movements. I'm keeping them. I'll figure it out. I always figure it out. Nia grabbed her shoulders, forcing eye contact. You don't have to do everything alone. You know that, right? That asking for help isn't weakness. But Havitsia had learned young that asking for help was how you got disappointed, how you gave people power to let you down. She'd survived this long by relying on herself, and she'd survived this too. I survived 13 foster homes, Havitsia said quietly. I survived medical school while working 3 jobs. I survived being the only black woman in my surgical residency class while everyone waited for me to fail. I'll survive this. This isn't about survival. This is about living. There's a difference. Not in my experience. The pregnancy was brutal. Morning sickness that lasted all day. Exhaustion that made her surgical shifts feel impossible, and the constant gnawing fear that she couldn't do this, that she'd fail these babies before they even had a chance. She'd wake at night in cold sweats, dreaming about social services taking her children away, repeating the cycle that had destroyed her own childhood. Her colleagues noticed. The whispers started. A few were supportive, but most looked at her with thinly veiled judgment. Single mother, irresponsible, not committed enough to medicine. She felt their eyes tracking her expanding belly, heard the comments about how motherhood would derail her career. One colleague, Dr. Harrison, cornered her in the break room. You know, statistically, female surgeons who have children see a significant drop in complex case assignments. Just something to consider. Are you telling me to terminate my pregnancy for my career? I'm telling you the reality of our field. Medicine doesn't accommodate motherhood well. Then maybe medicine needs to change, Havitsia said coldly, walking away before she said something that would cost her job. Dr. Patterson, the chief of surgery, called her into his office when she was showing enough that Scrubs couldn't hide it. We need to discuss your situation, he said, folding his hands on his desk. My pregnancy? She corrected coldly. It's called a pregnancy. Your pregnancy makes your current surgical schedule impossible. I'm moving you to consultations and teaching until after delivery. I can still operate. I'm pregnant, not disabled. It's not about capability. It's about liability. He softened slightly. Havitsia, you're one of our best surgeons. Take the time you need. Come back when you're ready. But she heard what he didn't say. Come back if you're still committed. If motherhood hasn't made you a liability. She moved to lighter duties, swallowing her pride like bitter medicine. Watched other surgeons take the complex cases she'd worked her entire life to earn. Felt her career stalling, while her body swelled with life she hadn't planned for, but was starting to fiercely love. The financial reality hit hard. Consultations paid less than surgery. Her apartment lease was coming up for renewal with a rent increase she couldn't afford. Medical bills from prenatal care piled up despite her hospital employee insurance. She started selling things. Her nice work clothes that no longer fit, textbooks from medical school, anything that might bring in extra money. Nia offered to help financially, but Havitsia's pride wouldn't allow it. She'd never taken handouts. Never would. The babies moved constantly. Little flutters that became kicks, that became full-body acrobatics, that made her laugh despite everything. She talked to them at night, lying in bed with her hands on her belly, making promises she hoped she could keep. "I don't know what I'm doing," she whispered into the darkness, "but I'm going to try so hard. I'm going to love you so much you'll never doubt it for a second. You're going to have everything I didn't: safety, stability, a mother who chooses you every single day." She cried sometimes, alone in the dark, terrified and overwhelmed. But in the morning, she got up and kept going, because that was what survivors did. Labor came during a thunderstorm, early but not dangerously so. Nia drove her to the hospital where she worked, holding her hand through contractions while rain hammered the windows. Walking through the halls, where she usually wore scrubs and authority, now in a hospital gown and vulnerable, felt surreal. The delivery was long and painful and terrifying and beautiful. 20 hours of labor that left her exhausted and shaking. The medical staff treated her with careful professionalism, but she saw the pity in their eyes. Single mother, no partner present. They'd seen this story before. Jack came first, screaming his outrage at the world. Joe followed minutes later, quieter, but just as determined. Two perfect sons, with their father's eyes and their mother's stubbornness. And Havisha fell in love harder than she knew was possible. "They're beautiful," Nia breathed, tears streaming down her face. Havisha held them both, one in each arm, and felt something break open in her chest. Not the walls she'd built, those were still standing, but a new space, vast and terrifying, where love lived alongside fear. "I'm their mother," she said wonderfully, trying the words out. "I'm somebody's mother." "You're their whole world," Nia corrected. The first months were survival. Feeding, changing, soothing, sleeping in 20-minute increments. Her savings dwindled to nothing. Her apartment felt smaller. Her body ached constantly. She tried to breastfeed both babies, but her supply wasn't enough, so she supplemented with formula she could barely afford. Every diaper, every can of formula, every tiny expense added up. But the boys grew, their personalities emerging like flowers pushing through concrete. Jack was sensitive, watching the world with careful eyes, startling easily at loud noises. Joe was bold, grabbing at everything with fearless hands, always pushing boundaries. They were completely different and utterly perfect. She loved them with a ferocity that scared her. Going back to work was agony. Leaving them with strangers at daycare while she returned to consultations felt like tearing off her own skin. She pumped breast milk in supply closets during breaks. She rushed home during lunch to check on them. She existed in a constant state of exhaustion and guilt. "You can't keep this pace," Nia warned. "You're going to collapse." "I don't have a choice. I have to work. I have to provide. Maybe you should try to find him, the father. He should be helping." "No." The word was final. "I don't need him." "We're fine." They weren't fine. But admitting that felt like admitting failure. Meanwhile, in a city across the ocean, Trent Southey's life was imploding in slow motion. The confrontation with Delphine had been spectacular. She'd found evidence of his disappearance during the wedding, security footage of him leaving the reception early, returning at dawn with rumpled clothes and a distant expression. The wedding where their families had expected them to announce their engagement. "You slept with someone," Delphine said, her voice ice. "At my family friend's wedding, you slept with some random woman." "We're not together," Trent said wearily. "This engagement our parents want isn't real, Delphine. It never was. It was real enough for two families who've been planning this alliance for years." She smiled sharply. "But clearly you're not ready for adult responsibilities. I'm calling it off publicly, with reasons. Fine, tell them whatever you want." "Oh, I will. I'll make sure everyone knows that Trent Southey chose a one-night stand over his future." That should play well in society pages. The scandal had been immediate. Business pages speculated about the failed Southey-Ashworth merger. Society columns whispered about Trent's mystery woman. His father, Garrison Southey, summoned him home with barely controlled rage. "You embarrassed this family," Garrison said, standing behind his massive desk like a judge delivering sentence. "You embarrassed our name for what? Some girl?" I'm not marrying Delphine. Not for you, not for business, not for any reason. Then you'll prove yourself another way. Garrison's smile was cold. The Bangkok property is failing. Turn it around in 18 months, or I'm removing you from succession. You want to throw away your responsibilities? Fine, earn them back. Maybe I don't want succession. Maybe I don't want any of this. Then what do you want? Trent thought about a woman on a terrace in Monaco, about honest conversation and real laughter and feeling human for the first time in years. But he couldn't explain that to his father, who'd never understood anything that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. I don't know, he said finally, but it's not this. Trent had thrown himself into work with desperate focus, trying to bury the memory of one perfect night with a woman whose touch had made him feel real. He told himself it was better this way, that she'd been right. Some things were perfect because they didn't have a second chapter. He almost believed it. But at night, alone in hotel suites across the world, he thought about her laugh, her honesty, the way she'd seen through every wall he'd built and hadn't flinched. He'd tried to find her through the wedding venue, through Naya's company, through every connection he had. But she'd vanished like smoke, and maybe that was for the best. He thought about her and wondered if she ever thought about him. 3,000 miles apart, neither knowing about the twins sleeping in a cramped Detroit apartment, they both tried to forget what couldn't be forgotten. Chapter 3. 3 Years of Silence. Jack drew sunsets in purple and gold, while Joe built towers that defied physics and gravity, and Davicia watched her sons with the kind of exhausted love that made her chest physically ache. They were everything. Tornado forces of energy who turned her small apartment into a kingdom of blanket forts and crayon masterpieces. Jack would spend hours drawing intricate pictures of families holding hands, always asking why their family only had 3 people when his friend Emma had 5. Joe would climb furniture with fearless determination, giving Havisha heart attacks daily. "Mama, why don't we have a daddy?" Joe asked one morning, matter of fact while spooning cereal into his mouth. Javicia's hands stilled on the coffee maker. She'd known this question was coming, had prepared answers, but nothing felt adequate. "You do have a daddy," she said carefully. "He just doesn't live with us, and why not?" "Because sometimes families look different. Some have mommies and daddies together. Some have just mommies. Some have 2 daddies. Some have grandparents. Ours has me and you 2, and that's perfect." Jack looked up from his drawing. "Emma says her daddy takes her to the park." The guilt was a knife between her ribs. "I take you to the park." "I know. But Emma has a daddy and a mommy." "Well, Emma probably doesn't have a mommy who can do surgery to fix people's hearts," Havisha said lightly, ruffling his hair. "That's pretty cool, right?" I guess," Jack said, unconvinced. She'd gone back to work when the boys were 6 months old, piecing together childcare through Nia, neighbors, and a daycare she could barely afford. The juggling act was endless, racing from the hospital to pick them up, missing important surgeries because Joe had a fever, watching her career plateau while other surgeons advanced. But the boys thrived, grew taller and braver and more themselves every day. Jack's drawings covered her fridge. Joe's laughter filled the apartment. They were happy, and she told herself that was enough. Then Nia called on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice strange. "I need you to do something for me. Don't ask questions, just say yes." Naim, David's company was acquired. "The new owner is throwing a gala this weekend. I need you there, please. I don't have a sitter, I don't have a dress, I'll watch the boys. I'll bring you a dress. V, please. I need moral support." Something in her friend's voice made Havisha agree, despite every instinct screaming that galas weren't her world. She didn't belong in ballrooms with champagne fountains and people who talked about vacation homes like they were discussing the weather. The dress Nia brought was beautiful, deep, burgundy that made her skin glow, and Havisha felt like an imposter wearing it. Like a little girl playing dress-up in her mother's closet, except she'd never had a mother to steal clothes from. "You look gorgeous," Naya said, her voice oddly tight. You okay? Be fine, just nervous about the new ownership. Everything's changing. The ballroom was exactly what Havisia expected. Glittering chandeliers, waiters with champagne, people in clothes that cost more than her monthly rent. She stayed close to Nia, clutching a glass of wine she wasn't drinking, counting the minutes until she could politely leave. She thought about her sons at home, probably giving Nia's husband chaos, and smiled despite herself. This wasn't her world. Her world was crayon drawings and bedtime stories and the sacred exhaustion of loving two small humans with everything she had. Then a voice over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Trent Southey. The room erupted in polite applause. Havisia glanced toward the stage without much interest, then froze as a man stepped into the spotlight. Everything stopped. Her heart, her breath, the rotation of the earth. Trent stood at the podium, in a perfectly tailored suit, older than she remembered, but unmistakably him. Same eyes, same mouth that had whispered her name in the darkness. Same man who'd given her one perfect night and two perfect sons, and then vanished into memory. He was talking about vision and growth, and something about hospitality, but Havisia couldn't hear over the roaring in her ears. This wasn't possible. This was Monaco and reality colliding, and she felt like she was falling without moving. Their eyes met across the crowded room. He stopped mid-sentence, literally stopped speaking, his mouth still open, staring at her like she was a ghost. The silence stretched awkward and long before he recovered, stumbling through the rest of his speech while his eyes kept finding hers. Havisia couldn't move, couldn't think, could barely breathe. When the speech ended and he stepped off stage, Nia grabbed her arm hard. Did you know? Havisia whispered. I suspected. When I heard the Southey name, I thought maybe, but I wasn't sure. V, I'm sorry, I should have warned you. But I thought, I need to leave. But Trent was already moving through the crowd toward her with single-minded determination. And people were watching, sensing drama with the instinct of sharks smelling blood. He stopped 2 feet away, close enough that she could see he'd barely aged, that Monaco hadn't been a dream but a memory made flesh. Havisia, he said, and her name in his mouth after 3 years felt like betrayal and homecoming at once. Don't, she said quietly. Please. Can we talk? Just 5 minutes. She looked at him, really looked, and saw desperation and hope and something that looked like longing. Saw the man who'd made her laugh until she cried, who'd understood what it meant to be trapped by your own life. Saw the father of her children who didn't know they existed. She slapped him, hard, open palm across his face, the crack echoing in the sudden silence. That's for making me believe in something beautiful and then disappearing, she said, voice shaking. Then she walked out, head high, heart shattering, leaving him standing in the middle of his own gala with a red handmark blooming across his cheek. She made it to the parking lot before the tears came, before the rage and relief and terror crashed through her in waves. He ran after her, keys jangling. V, wait. He's their father, Havisia said, the words ripping out of her. Trent is Jack and Joe's father. And he's not just some random guy, Nia. He's a billionaire. He could take them. He could take my boys. He wouldn't. You don't know that. I don't know that. I don't know anything except I just found my son's father, and he lives in a completely different world, and this is going to destroy everything. Behind them, footsteps. Trent burst through the ballroom doors, looking wild and desperate. Havisia, please. I need to understand. You're a father, she said, turning to face him. Congratulations. You have twin sons, Jack and Joe. They're 3 years old and they look just like you, and they ask why they don't have a daddy like other kids. The color drained from his face. What? Monaco? That night, you left me pregnant, Trent. I didn't know how to find you. Didn't know your last name or anything beyond Trent, who made me feel human for one night, and then vanished. I looked for you, he said hoarsely. After that night, I tried to find you. Asked everyone at the wedding, but no one knew who you were. You were just Nia's friend visiting from America, and she'd already left for her honeymoon. I had no way. Well, now you know. You have sons, and I've raised them alone for 3 years, while you built empires, so congratulations on your genetics contribution. Her voice was acid and agony. We're fine without you. We've always been fine without you. Havisha, don't follow me. Don't contact me. We don't need you. She got into Nia's car and drove away, leaving him standing in the parking lot. And she didn't look back, even though every instinct screamed to turn around. When she got home, Jack and Joe were asleep on Nia's couch, tangled together the way they always slept. She stood watching them breathe, these perfect, beautiful humans she'd made with a stranger she'd loved for one night. And she knew, with certainty that felt like doom, that nothing would ever be simple again. Chapter 4. The Sage. Trent appeared on her doorstep the next morning, holding coffee and looking like he hadn't slept, which gave Havisha a savage satisfaction because she hadn't slept either. Go away, she said through the chain lock. I need to talk to you, please. There's nothing to talk about. I have twin sons I didn't know existed. There's everything to talk about. His voice cracked. Havisha, please. I'm not here to take anything. I just need to understand. Against every protective instinct, she opened the door. He stepped into her small apartment, and she watched him take in the space, the worn furniture, the toys scattered everywhere, the crayon drawings taped to every surface, the life she'd built in his absence. His eyes lingered on a drawing of 3 stick figures labeled Mama, Jack, Joe in crayon. No 4th figure. No, Daddy, they're still asleep, she said curtly. You have 10 minutes. He sat on her second-hand couch like it might collapse under him. Tell me everything. The pregnancy, the birth, their lives. I want to know everything I missed. You want 3 years summarized in 10 minutes. I want whatever you'll give me, so she told him. The brutal pregnancy and terrifying delivery, and endless nights of feeding schedules. Told him about Jack's first word, Mama, and Joe's fearless first steps off the couch. Told him about scraped knees and fever scares, and the day Jack drew his first recognizable picture. Told him about the time Joe got croup and she'd spent the night in the emergency room, alone and terrified he'd stop breathing. Told him about daycare costs that consumed half her paycheck and formula expenses that made her cry in grocery store aisles. She told him everything, and watched his face cycle through grief and wonder and devastation. I should have been there, he said finally, but you weren't. Because I didn't know. Havisha, if I'd known, you'd what? Shown up with your billions and made everything magically better. She laughed bitterly. I didn't need saving, Trent. I needed a partner. I needed someone to hold Joe when I was covered in Jack's vomit. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't failing when I couldn't afford the nice daycare. I needed someone in the 3 a.m. darkness when I was so tired I couldn't remember my own name. I needed someone to tell me I was doing okay when everything felt impossible. Let me be that now. You can't buy back time. I know that. He leaned forward, desperate. But I can be here going forward. I can support you, help you, be their father. They don't know you. You're a stranger. Then let me stop being a stranger. Before she could respond, a small voice from the hallway. Mama? Jack stood in his dinosaur pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes, staring at the strange man on their couch with wide, cautious eyes. Havisha's heart stopped. Hey, baby, you're up early. Who's that? The question hung heavy. Trent looked at her, silently asking permission, and Havisha realized this was the moment. The before and after. Whatever she said next would change everything. This is Trent, she said carefully. He's someone Mama used to know. Joe appeared then, bolder, marching right up to Trent with suspicious eyes. Why are you here? I came to meet you, Trent said, his voice unsteady. If that's okay, are you my daddy? The words were a bomb in the quiet apartment. Havisha opened her mouth to deflect, but Trent spoke first. Yes, he said simply, I am. And I know that's confusing because I haven't been here, but I'd really like to know you both. If you'll let me. Jack hid behind Havish's legs. Joe crossed his arms, miniature and fierce. Why weren't you here before? Joe demanded. Because I didn't know about you. And that's my fault, not your mama's. I should have found her. Should have looked harder. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Promises are easy, Havisha said coldly. Trent's eyes met hers. Then let me prove I mean it. The next weeks were warfare disguised as negotiation. Trent showed up constantly. At the apartment, at the hospital, at the boys' daycare drop-off. He sent support offers through lawyers that Havisha tore up. Sent gifts for the boys that she returned. Her pride was iron, and his persistence was titanium, and neither would bend. One particularly difficult day, he showed up with a new car seat for her aging vehicle. I don't want your charity, she said. It's not charity. It's safety for our sons. Your car seat is expired. I know what my car seat is. I've been handling their safety just fine. I'm not saying you haven't. I'm saying you don't have to handle everything alone anymore. I've been alone for 3 years. I'm used to it. Well, get unused to it. I'm not going anywhere. She wanted to slam the door in his face, but Jack had seen the new car seat and was excited about the bright colors. She took it, hating that she needed it, hating more that he was right. You're being stubborn, Nia said during one of their exhausted late-night phone calls. I'm being protective. You're being scared. Damn right I'm scared. He could take them, Nia. He has unlimited resources, and I have a cramped apartment and student loans. He could paint me as unstable, unfit, and take my babies. Do you really think he would? Havisha wanted to say yes, wanted to believe the worst because that was safer than hoping. But she'd seen his face when he looked at Jack and Joe, seen the wonder and grief and desperate love of a man meeting his children for the first time. I don't know, she whispered, and that terrifies me. Finally, exhausted and worn down, she agreed to supervised visits. He could see the boys twice a week, short sessions, always with her present. The rules were rigid and non-negotiable. The first real visit, Trent sat on her floor surrounded by toy cars and blocks, looking completely out of place in his expensive suit. Jack approached slowly, offering him a crayon and paper. Can you draw? Jack asked. Not very well, Trent admitted. That's okay. I'll teach you. They sat side by side, Jack explaining why the sky should be purple and mountains should be upside down. Trent followed instructions seriously, his terrible drawing making Jack giggle. Joe was harder, maintaining his suspicious distance, firing questions like ammunition. Why weren't you here when we were babies? Where do you live? Do you have other kids you like better? Why does Mama cry sometimes? That last question made Havisha's breath catch. She hadn't realized Joe noticed. Trent answered every question honestly, never deflecting, never making excuses. I live far away. I don't have other children, and I could never like anyone better than you and your brother because you're the most important people in the world to me. Even though we just met. That doesn't make sense, Joe said. Love doesn't always make sense. Do you love Mama? The question hung in the air. Trent's eyes found Havisha's across the room. I care about your Mama very much, he said carefully. She's the strongest person I know. Joe considered this. She is strong. She carried me when I was sick and I threw up on her and she didn't even get mad. That's because she loves you more than anything. Do you love us more than anything? I'm learning too, and I hope one day you'll let me prove it. Something in Havisha's chest cracked watching him try. Watching him sit cross-legged on her worn carpet, learning his sons one careful question at a time. He was patient when Joe tested him, gentle when Jack showed him drawings. Present in a way that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with showing up. By the end of the visit, Jack had fallen asleep against Trent's shoulder, and Joe was explaining the complex rules of his made-up game. And Trent looked at Havisha with tears in his eyes. Thank you, he said quietly, for letting me know them, for raising them into these incredible humans. Don't make me regret this, she replied, but the edges of her voice had softened. After he left, she found an envelope on her counter. Inside, a check with more zeros than she could process, and a note, not trying to buy anything, just trying to help carry what you've carried alone. Please let me. She should have torn it up. Should have sent it back with a scathing message about pride and independence. Instead, she looked at the pile of bills on her counter. At the notices about overdue daycare payments. At the electric bill threatening disconnection. At the reality of raising twins on one income. She thought about Jack needing new shoes because his toes were cramping. About Joe's asthma medication that insurance only partially covered. About the leak in her ceiling that her landlord refused to fix. She cashed the check and hated herself a little for it. But she fed her sons that night without counting pennies. And that had to count for something. Chapter 5. The Arrangement. The routine developed slowly, carefully, like building a house of cards in a windstorm. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, Trent would arrive at 6 with takeout and stories from his day. He'd play with the boys, help with bath time, read bedtime stories in a voice that made even Havitsia stop and listen from the kitchen. Jack bloomed under the attention. He'd bring Trent his drawings, explaining the purple skies and the houses with too many windows. Trent would study each one seriously, asking questions about colors and feelings, treating Jack's art like it mattered. Joe remained skeptical, but was slowly warming. He'd test Trent constantly, asking him to fix broken toys, to explain why birds flew, to race him across the small apartment. Trent passed every test by trying, even when he failed. "Your dad is weird," Joe announced one evening. "How so?" Havitsia asked, folding laundry. "He doesn't know anything. Like he didn't know how to make a pillow fort, or that you can't mix the red blocks with the blue ones because they're enemies. Maybe you can teach him." Joe considered this. Yeah, he's pretty dumb about important stuff. But he's learning. From Joe, this was high praise. But outside their small bubble, the world was closing in. A photographer caught Trent leaving her building, and suddenly her private life became public property. Headlines screamed about the Southiers' secret family. Paparazzi staked out her apartment building. Other parents at daycare whispered and stared. Havitsia's supervisor called her into his office, looking uncomfortable. "The media attention is becoming disruptive," he said carefully. "Perhaps you could ask Mr. Southey to be more discreet." "I can't control the media." "No, but you could accept his help in managing it. Security, perhaps. A more private residence." The implication was clear. "Fix this, or we'll fix it for you." Havitsia left his office shaking with rage and shame. That evening, Trent arrived to find her apartment entrance blocked by photographers. He'd had to push through them, shielding his face, and he looked furious when she let him inside. "This is unacceptable," he said. "You think I enjoy being a spectacle? Let me help. I can get security, find you a place with better privacy, make this easier." "And I don't want easier. I want my life back." "Your old life is gone, Havitsia. Whether we like it or not, the media knows about us now. We can handle it reactive or proactive. Don't manage me like I'm one of your properties." They were arguing, in sharp whispers, trying not to wake the boys, when Jack appeared in the doorway crying. "The kids at school say I'm famous," he sobbed. "They say we're rich, and I'm lying about living in a small apartment. They're being mean." Havitsia gathered him close while guilt and rage battled in her chest. This was what she'd feared. Her sons paying the price for existing in Trent's world. "I'm fixing this," Trent said firmly. "Tomorrow, no arguments." She wanted to fight him, but Jack was crying into her shoulder, and Joe had woken up confused, and she was so tired of carrying everything alone. "Fine," she said, "but we're keeping this apartment. I'm not letting you erase my life." "I'm not trying to erase anything. I'm trying to protect our sons." The next day, he hired private security and enrolled the boys in a different school, one accustomed to high-profile families where security wasn't unusual. He paid off her student loans without asking. He fixed problems with money because that was what he knew how to do. And Havicia hated that it helped. Hated that the relief of not counting every penny felt like losing herself. Hated that accepting his help felt like admitting he was right about her needing saving. Then Delphine Ashworth appeared on television, perfectly coiffed and practiced, announcing that she and Trent were reconciling. "Everyone deserves second chances," Delphine told the interviewer with a gracious smile. "Yes, he has children from a previous relationship, but love means accepting all of someone. I look forward to being part of their lives." Havicia watched from her hospital break room, coffee going cold in her hands, feeling like she'd been slapped. Previous relationship, like Monaco had been some lengthy affair instead of one night. Like she was history instead of the mother of his children. Her phone exploded with calls from Trent that she ignored. He showed up at the hospital, but she refused to see him. Showed up at her apartment, but she wouldn't let him pass the door. "It's not what you think," he said through the chain lock. "I think it's exactly what I think. You're going back to your real life, and we're the complication you're managing." "That's not true." "Then why is your ex-fiancé on television talking about second chances?" Silence. Damning silence. "Let me explain. Please, not here. Not like this. The boys are asleep. You've lost your visiting rights for the day. Go home, Trent. Go home to your real world." She closed the door on his protests, then slid down to the floor and let herself cry. Not because she loved him. She barely knew him. But because for a moment she'd started to believe they could build something real. Stupid. So stupid. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nia. "Turn on Channel 7, now." Havicia grabbed the remote with shaking hands. The evening news was covering a press conference. Garrison Southey stood at a podium, silver-haired and commanding, announcing that his son was rekindling his relationship with Delphine Ashworth and that the family was pleased about this development. "And regarding the children," Garrison said smoothly, "we look forward to welcoming them into the family in whatever capacity is appropriate." Whatever capacity is appropriate. Like Jack and Joe were business arrangements instead of human beings. The phone rang. Trent again. This time she answered. "I didn't know he was doing that," he said immediately. "I swear to you, I had no idea." "Whatever capacity is appropriate." Her voice was ice. "Your father just said my sons are conditionally welcome in your family. My sons, Trent. Your sons. I know, I'm handling it. By going back to Delphine, by letting your father dictate terms, by making sure we know our place. That's not what's happening." "Then what is happening? Because from where I'm standing, you're choosing your old life, and we're just the messy complication you're trying to contain. Give me time to fix this." "Time?" She laughed, brittle and sharp. "I gave you 3 years, Trent. I raised our sons while you built empires. I don't owe you anything, least of all patience." "Havicia, figure out what you actually want. Then maybe we'll talk. Until then, supervised visits only, scheduled through lawyers. No more casual drop-ins, no more playing house. Please don't do this. You did this, you and your father, and your perfect Delphine. I'm just protecting what's mine." She hung up, blocked his number, and went to check on her sleeping sons. They looked peaceful, unaware that their father was choosing another woman over them before they even really knew him. Jack stirred as she adjusted his blanket. "Is Daddy coming tomorrow?" he murmured, half asleep. "I don't know, baby," she whispered. "I don't know." She stood in their doorway, watching them breathe, these perfect boys who deserved better than a father who couldn't choose them, who deserved better than a mother who'd been stupid enough to believe in fairy tales. Outside, photographers still waited. Inside, her heart quietly shattered. And somewhere in his own luxury, Trent Southey had to decide what mattered more, his father's approval or his son's love. Havicia already knew what he'd choose. Everyone always chose the easier path. Chapter 6. The Choice. Garrison Southeast's office occupied the top floor of a building that touched clouds, all steel and glass, and the kind of intimidating wealth that made normal people feel small. Trent sat across from his father's massive desk, feeling like a teenager being called to account instead of a grown man. "This situation has become untenable," Garrison said, the word dripping with distaste. "The media circus, the questions about legitimacy, your inability to handle basic family matters. They're my sons, not a situation. They're complications that could have been managed privately if you'd used any discretion." Garrison leaned back in his leather chair, studying his son like a disappointing acquisition. "Delphine has graciously offered to reconcile. Her family is willing to overlook your indiscretion. The smart play is obvious." The smart play? They're children, not business deals. "Everything is a business deal, Trent. The sooner you understand that, the better." Garrison pulled out a folder, sliding it across the desk. "These are the terms. You reconcile with Delphine, restore stability to the family name. The boys receive trust funds, education, whatever resources they need. Everyone wins, except Havicia. The mother is irrelevant. She'll be compensated generously for her cooperation." Trent felt something cold settle in his chest. This was who his father had always been, calculating, transactional, incapable of seeing people as anything but assets or liabilities. And Trent had spent his whole life trying to earn approval from someone who measured love in profit margins. "What if I say no? Then I freeze the accounts you currently control. The Bangkok property, the American expansion, all of it stops. You want to be a father? Fine. Do it without the family's resources. See how long your principles last when you can't afford lawyers to fight for custody." The threat hung heavy. Trent could fight his father and lose everything, leaving him powerless to help Havicia and the boys. Or he could play along, secure their future, and sacrifice his own chance at happiness. "I need time to think." "You have 24 hours. Then I'm moving forward with or without you." Trent drove aimlessly afterward, circling the city, trying to find clarity in motion. He thought about Jack's careful drawings and Joe's suspicious questions, thought about Havicia's fierce independence and the walls she'd built to survive, thought about the fact that he was falling in love with her strength and her stubbornness, and the way she loved their sons with everything she had. But he also thought about his father's threat, about custody battles where unlimited resources won, about Havicia losing the boys because Trent couldn't provide the stability she'd built alone. He called an old friend from law school, someone who specialized in family custody cases. "Be straight with me," Trent said. "If my father comes after Havicia for custody, what are her chances?" "Against Garrison Southeast with unlimited legal resources. Not good. Her foster care background will be used against her. Single-parent household, limited income even with your support. A good lawyer could make her look unstable. Even though she's an incredible mother, family court isn't always about who's the better parent. It's about who can provide more stability, more resources, more opportunity. Your father would win, Trent, and he knows it. What if I marry Delphine? Would that protect Havicia and the boys? If you're married and stable, your father loses his leverage. He can't claim the children need his intervention if you're providing a traditional family structure. It would actually protect Dr. Leslie's custody rights." The call ended with Trent feeling sick. Every choice felt like betrayal. Fight his father and risk Havicia losing the boys. Submit to his father's terms and lose any chance with the woman he loved. He sat in his car outside a park where children played, watching families that looked effortless. A father pushing his daughter on a swing, a mother tying her son's shoe. Simple moments he'd missed with Jack and Joe, simple moments he might never have. He showed up at her apartment that evening without calling first. knowing she'd probably slam the door in his face. She opened it looking exhausted, her scrubs rumpled from a long shift, and her expression when she saw him was carefully blank. "The boys are asleep," she said. "I came to talk to you, not them." She let him in reluctantly, and they sat in her small living room surrounded by toy remnants and the comfortable chaos of children's lives. "My father gave me an ultimatum," Trent said. "Marry Delphine, restore the family image, and he'll ensure Jack and Joe have everything. Refuse, and he cuts me off completely. And you're here because you want my blessing to choose her?" Havisha's voice was bitter. "I'm here because I don't know what the right choice is." He ran his hands through his hair. "If I fight him, I lose access to resources. Lawyers support everything that could help protect you and the boys. If I agree, they're secure. Trust funds, education, a life where they never worry about money. But you'd be with someone else." "Yes." She laughed, sharp and humorless. "You want me to tell you it's okay to marry another woman for my children's financial security? That's quite an ask. Trent, I want you to help me figure out what's best for them. What's best for them is a father who chooses them fully, not one who's calculating cost-benefit analyses of their existence." She stood, arms wrapped around herself. "But you've always been calculating, haven't you? That's what your world teaches. How to measure worth, how to make strategic decisions, how to sacrifice the messy parts for the profitable ones. That's not fair. Fair. You want to talk about fair?" Her voice rose. "I raised them alone. I missed surgeries because Joe had a fever. I worked double shifts to afford daycare. I built a life for them from nothing. And now you show up with your billions and your complications and your father's ultimatums. And you want me to make this easy for you?" "Havisha, here's what's easy, Trent. Walk away. Marry Delphine. Set up your trust funds and pay your support and show up for holidays like a part-time parent. That's the clean solution. That's what people like you do. People like me. Rich people who solve problems with money instead of presents. Who think love is transactional. Who," her voice broke, "who leave?" The word hung between them, heavy with all her childhood wounds and all the people who'd abandoned her to foster care and all the ways she'd learned that people left when things got hard. "I don't want to leave," he said quietly, "but you will, because staying is messy and complicated and your father disapproves. Because choosing us means giving up your perfect life." She wiped tears angrily. "So go, marry Delphine. Be who your father wants you to be. Jack and Joe will survive. They've survived without you this long. What if I want more than survival? For them, for us. There is no us. There's barely even a you and them. We had one night 3 years ago and we have 2 children. That's not a foundation for anything except co-parenting." He stood, moving closer. "It could be more. Could it? Because it seems like when things get difficult, you run back to what's comfortable. Back to Delphine and your father's approval and the life you understand. I'm trying to protect you by leaving me. By choosing someone else? That's protection. By making sure my father can't destroy you in court. By ensuring Jack and Joe have resources no matter what happens between us." His voice was desperate. "I talked to a lawyer today. If my father fights for custody, you'll lose. He has unlimited resources and strategies to make you look unfit. Your foster care history, single-parent status, limited income. He'll use all of it." She felt the blood drain from her face. "You're threatening me? I'm warning you. My father will come after them if I don't comply. And he'll win because the system favors money and power." He took her hands. "But if I marry Delphine, he loses his leverage. You keep custody because I'm in a stable situation. It protects you by sacrificing yourself, by marrying someone you don't love, by doing what's necessary. My lawyer confirmed it. If I'm married and settled, my father can't claim the boys need his intervention. Your custody is secure. I don't want to be secure because you're trapped in a loveless marriage. Then what do you want? Because I'm trying to find a solution where everyone gets something, even if no one gets everything. I want you to want us enough to fight, to walk away from your father's money and his approval and his empire, to choose us even when it's hard, even when it costs you everything." She pulled away. But you won't. So let's stop pretending this is anything but what it is, a custody arrangement with financial obligations. Shavisha, please. Go home, Trent. Marry Delphine. Secure your empire. Just don't pretend you're doing it for us. He left because he didn't know how to argue with her walls, and she closed the door behind him quietly instead of slamming it, which somehow hurt more. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the man who'd made her feel human for one night and who was now making her feel expendable, thinking about Jack's questions about why their family looked different and Joe's testing of whether his father would actually stay. She thought about what Trent had said about custody battles and legal threats. The fear was real, visceral. Garrison Southey could take her children. The system that had failed her as a child could fail her again as a mother. Maybe Trent was right. Maybe his sacrifice was the only way to protect them all. The thought made her sick. Her phone buzzed. A text from Trent. "You're right. About everything. I'm sorry." Then another. "Delphine and I are announcing our engagement tomorrow. I wish I was brave enough to choose differently." She read the messages until they blurred, then turned her phone off completely. In the morning, the news was everywhere. Trent Southey and Delphine Ashworth were officially engaged. Society pages celebrated the reunion. Garrison released a statement about family legacy and appropriate choices. And Javicia went to work, came home, fed her sons, and pretended her heart wasn't breaking. "Is Daddy coming today?" Jack asked. "Not today, baby." "Why not?" "Because your father chose his empire over us," she thought. "Because love always loses to money in his world. Because I was stupid enough to believe this time might be different. He's busy," she said instead. "But he loves you very much." She hoped that part at least was true. Outside her window, the city glittered with lights from buildings she'd never be able to afford. Inside her small apartment, her sons played with toys from the dollar store, and somewhere in his luxury penthouse, Trent Southey was making plans to marry a woman he didn't love while thinking about the one he was losing. If this was protection, Javicia thought bitterly, it felt an awful lot like abandonment. Chapter 7. The Unraveling. The engagement photos were everywhere. Delphine in couture, Trent in tailored perfection, both smiling for cameras with the kind of practiced ease that came from growing up performing for audiences. They looked like they belonged together, all polish and poise and the kind of beauty that existed in magazines instead of real life. Javicia stopped looking at news sites after the third day, but colleagues at the hospital whispered loud enough for her to hear. Poor Dr. Leslie, how embarrassing. Did she really think a man like that would choose her? She held her head high and focused on surgery, losing herself in the precision of sutures and the steady rhythm of hearts under her hands. At least in the operating room she had control. At least there she knew exactly what needed fixing and how to fix it. The twins noticed their father's absence immediately. Jack's drawings became darker, full of stormy skies and houses with broken windows. Joe acted out at school, pushing other kids, refusing to follow rules. When the teacher called her in for a conference, Javicia wanted to scream that this wasn't her fault, that she'd been handling everything fine until Trent crashed back into their lives and then left again. Instead, she said, "We're going through some family changes. I'll handle it." She always handled it. That was what she did. Trent sent weekly support payments and monthly gifts for the boys, all routed through lawyers. No personal contact, no visits, no phone calls explaining why he'd disappeared after promising not to. Just money, like that could replace presence. Javicia deposited every check and felt a piece of her dignity crack each time. Nia tried to convince her to reach out, to at least let the boys talk to him. "He made his choice," Javicia said flatly. "I'm respecting it. You're punishing the boys to punish him. I'm protecting them from getting attached to someone who leaves. He's their father. Biology doesn't make you a parent. Showing up does. and he stopped showing up. 2 months into the engagement, Havitia was working a night shift when her phone rang with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Don't hang up," Trent's voice, rough and desperate. "Please don't hang up." She should have. Should have blocked the number and gone back to work. Instead, she stepped into an empty supply closet for privacy. "What do you want?" "To explain." "To tell you the truth." He stopped, breathing hard. "I need to see you. Not at your apartment. Somewhere neutral, please." "Why would I agree to that?" "Because I'm drowning, and you're the only person who might understand." The admission caught her off guard. She thought about hanging up anyway, about protecting herself and her sons from more disappointment. But she heard something in his voice that sounded like the man from Monaco, broken and honest and reaching for anything real. "There's a coffee shop on Maple Street. Tomorrow at noon. You get 15 minutes. "Thank you." She hung up, feeling stupid and hopeful in equal measure. The coffee shop was a deliberate choice, public enough that he couldn't make a scene, private enough for difficult conversations. She arrived first, ordering black coffee she didn't drink, watching the door like it might explode. Trent walked in, looking like hell. Expensive hell. His suit probably cost more than her monthly rent, but definitely hell. Dark circles under his eyes, weight lost from an already lean frame. The kind of exhaustion that came from not sleeping, not eating. Not anything. He sat across from her without ordering, hands wrapped around nothing. "You look terrible," she said. "I feel worse." He met her eyes and she saw desperation there. "The engagement is a nightmare. Delphine is calculating everything, where we're photographed, what I wear, what I say. My father is planning the wedding like it's a merger, because to him that's what it is. And I'm suffocating. You chose this. I chose wrong," his voice cracked. "I thought I was protecting you and the boys by securing resources. I thought being practical was being responsible. But I've barely slept since the engagement, because every time I close my eyes, I see Jack's drawings and Joe's questions and your face when I told you I was marrying someone else." "Trent." "I'm in love with you," he said, the words tumbling out. "I've been in love with you since Monaco, when you told me about building yourself from nothing, and I realized you were the bravest person I'd ever met. And I'm in love with our sons, with who they are and who they're becoming. And I'm engaged to a woman I don't love because I'm a coward who thought he was being practical." Havicia's chest ached. "You can't say things like that when you're still wearing her ring. I know. You can't tell me you love us while planning a wedding to someone else. I know. Then why are you here?" He looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. "Because I needed you to know the truth before everything falls apart. Because you deserve honesty even when it's ugly. Because," he stopped, swallowing hard, "because Delphine is pregnant, or says she is, and I don't know what to do." The world tilted. Havitia gripped her coffee cup to keep from falling. "Pregnant," she repeated numbly. "She announced it last week. To my father first, then to me. Says we conceived right after the reconciliation." His laugh was bitter. "Which is fascinating, considering I haven't touched her since we got back together." "What?" "We're engaged in name only. Separate rooms when we travel. No intimacy. Nothing real. She knows it, I know it. My father probably knows it but doesn't care as long as the image holds." He leaned forward. "The baby isn't mine, Havicia. It can't be. Have you confronted her? She cries and says I'm being cruel, doubting her when she's carrying my child. My father says questioning her publicly would be disastrous for the family. Everyone is acting like I'm insane for not celebrating. Why are you telling me this? Because I needed one person to know the truth. One person who might believe me when everyone else is acting like I'm losing my mind." His hands shook. "I'm going to expose her, hire investigators, gather evidence, blow this whole thing up. But when I do, my father will destroy me. He'll cut me off completely, and I'll have nothing to offer. You and the boys, we don't want your money, but you need stability, security, everything. I won't be able to provide once. Garrison is done with me." He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. I'm going to lose everything. But I needed you to know that I choose you, even if it's too late, even if you can't forgive me. I choose you and Jack and Joe over all of this." Havicia felt tears burning her eyes and refused to let them fall. "You're really going to walk away from everything?" "I'm going to stop being the person my father created and start being the person I actually am. The person you saw in Monaco before I got scared and reverted to type." He finally took her hand, and the touch felt like coming home and saying goodbye at once. "I don't expect you to wait for me. Don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I finally figured out what matters, even if I figured it out too late." Trent. Delphine is announcing the pregnancy publicly tonight at some charity gala. Big reveal, lots of press, perfect princess moment. I'm supposed to look overjoyed. His smile was broken. "Tomorrow I'm hiring the investigators. Give me a few weeks to gather evidence. Then I'm burning it all down." He stood to leave, and Gavicia realized she was about to let him walk away without saying what was clawing at her throat. "I'm terrified of letting you in," she said, the words rushing out. "I'm terrified that if I admit I have feelings for you, you'll leave. Everyone leaves. My foster families, anyone I've ever cared about. People leave when I get too attached, when I need them too much. So I built walls high enough that no one could hurt me. And you're asking me to tear them down for someone who's currently engaged to another woman. I know what I'm asking is impossible. But if you actually do this, if you actually walk away from all of it and choose us, I'm willing to try. To be terrified and try anyway." Tears finally spilled over. "Don't make me regret that, Trent. Don't make me wrong about you." "I won't," he promised. "I'll lose everything else, but I won't lose you again." He left before she could respond, and Havicia sat in the coffee shop crying into cold coffee, terrified that she was setting herself up for the biggest heartbreak of her life. That night, she watched Delphine announce her pregnancy on the news. All glowing skin and designer maternity wear and practiced joy. Watched Trent stand beside her looking like a prisoner, his smile never reaching his eyes. And she let herself hope, just a little, that he meant what he said, that this time someone might actually choose her, even knowing hope was the most dangerous thing she could allow herself to feel. Chapter 8. The Exposure. Trent hired investigators with the kind of ruthless efficiency he usually reserved for acquisitions. 3 separate firms, all instructed to dig into Delphine's life, her schedule, her private communications. He wanted evidence so airtight that even his father couldn't argue with reality. It took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of playing the devoted fiancé in public while quietly building a case against the woman he was supposed to marry. 2 weeks of attending pregnancy appointments, where ultrasound images looked suspiciously generic. 2 weeks of watching Delphine perform maternal joy for cameras while barely acknowledging him in private. The charade was suffocating. At a charity dinner, Delphine had placed his hand on her barely showing stomach for photographers, whispering through her smile, "Look happy or this falls apart for both of us." "I'm not the one lying," he'd whispered back. "No, you're just the one too weak to walk away." She was right, and that truth burned more than her deception. The evidence, when it came, was damning. Security footage of Delphine entering her personal trainer's apartment building at night, leaving at dawn. Credit card records showing hotel rooms booked under aliases. Text messages recovered from cloud backups that left no doubt about the affair or the baby's actual paternity. But the worst discovery was buried in financial records. Delphine had been receiving payments from Garrison for months, substantial payments labeled as consulting fees, but clearly something else entirely. The investigator's report landed on Trent's desk like a bomb waiting to detonate. "The pregnancy is real," the lead investigator said. "But timeline-wise, conception occurred weeks before your alleged reconciliation. The trainer is the biological father." "She knows it." "He knows it. They've been planning this." "Planning what exactly?" "To trap you into marriage. She gets the Southie name and money. He gets financial support for his child. Everyone wins except you. The investigator slid another folder across the desk. There's more. Your father knew. Trent's hands stilled. What? Garrison Southey received an anonymous tip about the affair 3 days after the pregnancy announcement. He buried it, paid off the source, actively concealed evidence that would have freed you from this engagement. The investigator's expression was grim. The financial records show he's been paying Delphine monthly amounts. We can't prove what for, but the timing suggests he incentivized her to go through with the reconciliation and pregnancy announcement. He values the merger with the Ashworth family more than he values you. Trent sat back, the air leaving his lungs. His father hadn't just allowed the deception, he'd orchestrated it, had paid Delphine to trap his own son, had chosen a business alliance over his own flesh and blood so completely that he'd funded a conspiracy against him. How much? Trent asked quietly. The payments? Yes, total. Just over $500,000 across 5 months. $500,000 to ensure Trent remained trapped, to guarantee the Ashworth merger, to sacrifice his son's happiness on the altar of profit. The betrayal cut deeper than Delphine's lies. His father, the man who'd raised him, who'd supposedly cared about legacy, had knowingly let him walk into a trap, had actively facilitated it, had chosen business over his own son's welfare so completely that he'd paid someone to deceive him. Trent sat in his office for hours after the investigator left, staring at evidence that would destroy his engagement, his father's carefully constructed empire, and possibly his entire family. The smart move would be to bury it. Play along, raise another man's child as his own, and maintain the status quo. But he'd spent his entire life making smart moves that left him hollow. He thought about Jack asking why he hadn't been there when they were babies, about Joe testing whether he'd actually stay, about Havisha building a life from nothing while he'd hidden behind his father's money and expectations. He was done hiding. He called his own lawyer first. I need you to review these documents. I want to know every legal angle before I move forward. The lawyer spent an hour going through the evidence. This is bulletproof. The affair is documented beyond doubt. The pregnancy timeline is irrefutable, and the financial connection between Garrison and Delphine suggests conspiracy. If you release this, it'll be devastating. Good. Trent, think carefully. Once this is public, there's no taking it back. Your father will retaliate with everything he has. Let him. I have 2 sons who need to see their father stand up for what's right instead of what's profitable. There's one more thing. If you break the engagement this publicly, Delphine might sue for breach of promise or defamation. Let her try. The evidence speaks for itself. He called Garrison and requested a family meeting. Formal, lawyers present. No room for deflection. His father's estate was exactly as he remembered, cold, imposing, designed to make visitors feel small. Trent walked into the study where Garrison waited behind his massive desk, looking every inch, the Emperor surveying his kingdom. This better be important, Garrison said. I have meetings. It's important. Trent laid the folders on the desk. Delphine's been having an affair with her personal trainer for over a year. The baby is his, not mine. Here's the proof. Garrison barely glanced at the evidence. I'm aware. You're aware, Trent laughed, the sound hollow. You knew she was lying and said nothing? I knew the Ashworth merger was too valuable to lose over an indiscretion. The baby gets the Southey name. Everyone is happy. Everyone except me. You'll adjust. Marriage is a partnership, Trent, not a romance novel. You fulfill your role. She fulfills hers. The baby provides an heir. What difference does biology make? The difference is, I have biological children she's treating like embarrassments. The difference is, you're asking me to raise another man's child while ignoring my actual sons. Trent stood, voice rising. The difference is I'm done being your puppet. Watch your tone. Or what? You'll disown me.
Cut me off?
Trent threw the second folder down, the one showing financial payments. You paid her. You paid Delphine to go through with this charade. $500,000 to trap your own son. You didn't just allow the deception, you funded it. For the first time, Garrison looked uncomfortable. Those payments were business arrangements. Those payments were bribes to trap your own son in a fake marriage. You orchestrated this entire thing because a merger mattered more than my life. I secured a strategic alliance that benefits the family. The family? Trent's voice broke. I'm your family. Jack and Joe are your family. But we're not worth as much as a merger, are we? We're not profitable enough to matter. You're being dramatic. I'm being honest. For the first time in my life, I'm being completely honest with you. He pointed to the evidence. I'm releasing all of this. The affair, the fake pregnancy claim, your involvement, the financial conspiracy. I'm burning it all down. Garrison's expression hardened. If you do this, there's no coming back. I'll remove you from company leadership, freeze your accounts, ensure you never work in this industry again. You'll have nothing. Good, the word hung heavy, because everything I have comes with strings attached to you. I'd rather have nothing and be free than have everything and be your prisoner. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was spending my entire life trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it. Trent moved toward the door. I have twin sons who are extraordinary humans. I have a chance at something real with a woman who sees me as more than a name and bank account. That's worth more than your entire empire. Those children will never be legitimate heirs. That woman will never fit into our world. You're throwing away your legacy for a fantasy. I'm choosing love over legacy. Something you've never understood. Trent opened the door, then turned back. You know what the saddest part is? Jack and Joe will never know their grandfather. They'll never know the man you could have been if you'd chosen to be human instead of a machine. And when you're dying alone in some hospital bed, surrounded by money instead of family, you'll realize that empires don't hold your hand at the end. People do. Get out, gladly. Goodbye, Father. Enjoy your empire. I hope it keeps you warm at night. He walked out of his father's house for the last time, feeling simultaneously terrified and liberated. His phone was already ringing. Garrison making calls, activating consequences, beginning the process of erasing his son from the family empire. By the time Trent reached his car, his corporate access was revoked. By the time he reached his penthouse, movers were already there per Garrison's instructions. The property was company-owned, and he had 24 hours to vacate. Trent looked around the space that had never felt like home. Expensive furniture he hadn't chosen, art he'd never really looked at, and life curated by others, impressive but empty. He packed quickly. 2 suitcases of clothes, a few personal items, Jack and Joe's drawings he'd kept in his desk drawer. Everything else could burn, he called his lawyer. Release everything. The evidence about Delphine, her affair, the fake pregnancy claim, my father's complicity and financial involvement. I want it public by tonight. That's scorched earth, Trent. There's no coming back from this. I don't want to come back. The story broke like a hurricane. News outlets ran with headlines about deception and betrayal and family conspiracy. Delphine's carefully constructed image shattered in hours. The Ashworth family scrambled for damage control. Garrison released a statement disowning Trent completely, painting him as unstable and vindictive. But the evidence was too strong, the timeline too clear, the financial connections too damning. Within days, Delphine and her trainer were photographed together, and she was forced to admit the truth. The Ashworth family withdrew from all business dealings with the Southease. Garrison's reputation took a massive hit for his role in the deception. Social media exploded with opinions. Some praised Trent for his courage. Others called it a family meltdown. The consensus was clear. The Southee dynasty was imploding. Trent watched his life implode from a modest hotel room, everything he'd owned reduced to 2 suitcases and a determination to start over. His phone rang constantly. Journalists wanting statements, former colleagues offering false sympathy, vultures circling the wreckage. He ignored them all. Instead, he sat on the edge of the cheap hotel bed and thought about what mattered. Not the empire he'd lost, not the reputation in tatters, not the fortune he'd walked away from. He thought about Jack's careful drawings and Joe's bold questions. He thought about Havicia's strength and the walls she'd built to survive. He thought about the family he'd found in a cramped Detroit apartment. Then he drove to Havicia's apartment. She opened the door looking shocked, like she'd been following the news and couldn't believe he'd actually done it. "You destroyed everything," she said. "Yeah. Your father disowned you. You have no job, no money, nowhere to live." "Yeah. Why would you do that?" He looked at her, really looked, and let himself be completely vulnerable. "Because I'd rather have nothing and be with you than have everything and lose my soul. Because Jack and Joe deserve a father who chooses them. Because you deserve someone who fights for you instead of running away. Trent, I don't expect you to take me back. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I meant what I said. I choose you. All of you. Even if it's too late." Havicia stared at him for a long moment, and he saw her walls warring with her heart. Saw the woman who'd been abandoned by everyone learning to trust again. Saw the moment she decided to be brave. "Come inside," she said quietly. "Let's figure this out together." He followed her into the small apartment that felt more like home than any mansion ever had, ready to build something real from the ashes of his old life. Ready to prove that love was worth losing everything for. Chapter 9. The Rebuilding. Trent got a job managing a small boutique hotel in Detroit called the Whitmore. It wasn't glamorous. 30 rooms, mostly business travelers, the kind of place where he fixed leaky faucets and argued with suppliers about toilet paper bulk rates. His salary was a fraction of what he'd made before, but he showed up every day with a determination that impressed even himself. Havicia watched this transformation with cautious fascination. The polished billionaire disappeared, replaced by someone who wore regular clothes and understood the value of working for things instead of buying them. He moved into a modest apartment 3 blocks from hers, close enough to be present, far enough to respect boundaries. The twins noticed immediately. "Daddy looks different," Jack observed one evening. "How so?" Havicia asked. "Less shiny, more real." Joe was more direct. "Are you poor now?" Trent laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "Poor is relative. But yeah, buddy, I don't have as much money as I used to." "Good. You were weird when you were rich." From Joe, this was the highest compliment. Trent showed up for every scheduled visit without fail. He learned how to cook simple meals after burning through 3 dinners. He helped with homework, even though Jack's math confused him, and Joe's reading was beyond his patience level. He read bedtime stories in funny voices that made the twins giggle, and slowly, carefully, he and Havicia began rebuilding something that might become trust. They had coffee while the boys were at school, real conversations about nothing and everything. She told him about difficult surgeries and impossible patients. He told her about arguing with a guest over checkout times and discovering he was good at hospitality when ego wasn't involved. "I think I actually like this life," he admitted one afternoon. "It's smaller, but it's mine, not something I inherited or had thrust upon me. I built it. That's what I've been trying to tell you," Havicia said, smiling. "There's power in building your own thing." "You were right about a lot of things." "I usually am." He laughed, and the sound was lighter than she'd ever heard it. Like he'd been carrying weight his whole life and only just realized he could set it down. But peace didn't last. Garrison filed for grandparents' rights, claiming Trent was unstable and the twins deserved the stability of family wealth. The lawsuit was vindictive and strategic, designed to punish his son for defiance and assert control over the only leverage remaining. The legal battle was brutal. Havicia's past was weaponized. Foster care history presented as instability, single parenthood questioned as inadequate. Trent's recent upheaval was framed as a mental breakdown. They painted a picture of 2 unfit parents, when the truth was 2 people trying their best against impossible odds. Character witnesses saved them. Nia testified about Havicia's dedication, Colleagues spoke about her surgical excellence. The twins' teachers described happy, well-adjusted children. Trent's new employer praised his work ethic and reliability. But the hardest moment came when the judge asked to speak with Jack and Joe privately. "Are you happy?" she asked them gently. Joe nodded emphatically. "Our dad is better now. He used to be sad. Now he's happy." "What about your mom?" Jack spoke up, his voice serious beyond his years. "Mama works really hard. She's tired a lot. But she loves us more than anything. And do you want to live with your grandfather?" Both boys looked horrified. Joe shook his head violently. "We don't know him. He's mean. He made Daddy sad." The judge ruled in their favor, dismissing Garrison's case with a sharp rebuke about using legal systems for personal vendettas. It was a victory, but the battle left them all exhausted. That night, after the twins were asleep, Havisha and Trent sat on her apartment steps watching the city lights. "I'm tired," she admitted. "So tired of fighting." "Me too." They sat in silence, shoulders touching, two people who'd been through hell trying to find peace on the other side. "Can I tell you something?" Havisha asked. "Always. I'm terrified." He turned to look at her. "Of what?" "Of this, of us. Of letting myself believe this is real." Her voice cracked. "I was 7 when my mother left me at social services. Just walked away. And I learned that day that people leave when things get hard. Every foster home after that reinforced it. People leave. That's what they do. Havisha. And then you left. Not in the same way, but you chose your father's empire over us, and it felt exactly like being 7 again. Like I wasn't enough to stay for." Tears streamed down her face. "So yeah, I'm terrified." "Because you're back, and you're trying, and you seem different. But what if you leave again? What if I let myself love you, and you decide this small life isn't enough?" Trent took her hands, his own eyes wet. "I need to tell you about my mother. He died when I was young. Cancer, slow and terrible. And my father, he just shut down. Became this cold, calculating machine who measured everything in profit and loss. He never mourned, never processed, just buried it under work. I didn't know. I learned from him that emotions were weaknesses, that love made you vulnerable, that the smart move was always the strategic one." He squeezed her hands. "Monaco happened right after I'd agreed to the engagement with Delphine. I was drowning in my father's expectations, and then I met you. And for one night, I remembered what it felt like to be human instead of a balance sheet." "Then why did you leave?" "Because I was terrified too. Terrified that if I let myself love you, my father would use it against me, would destroy you to control me. So I ran back to what felt safe, even though it was killing me." He lifted her hands to his lips. "I'm not running anymore. I know I hurt you. I know trust is earned, not given. But I'm here, Havisha. Not because it's easy or strategic or what my father wants, but because I love you and our sons more than I've ever loved anything. How do I know you won't leave when things get hard again? You don't. That's the terrifying part of love. There's no guarantee. But I can promise I'll wake up every day and choose you, choose us. Even on the days I'm scared or exhausted or things feel impossible, I'll choose you." Havisha looked at him through tears. Seeing the man from Monaco and the father who read bedtime stories and the person who'd burned his entire life down to prove he was serious. And she chose to be brave. She kissed him, not desperate or rushed like Monaco, but slow and intentional. A kiss that tasted like trust and hope and the terrifying beauty of trying again. "I'm choosing you too," she whispered against his mouth. "Even though I'm scared, even though every instinct tells me to run, I'm choosing to stay and see what we can build." They sat on the steps, kissing and crying, and planning a future that looked nothing like either of them had imagined, but felt more real than any fantasy. Inside, their sons slept peacefully, unaware that their parents were finally becoming whole. Chapter 10. The Beginning. 6 months passed in the kind of slow, steady building that created foundations instead of fireworks. Trent and Havisha dated like people learning each other for the first time, which in many ways they were. Coffee dates before work. Walks in the park while the twins played. Stolen conversations about dreams and fears and the ordinary magic of building something real. Their first real date was at a diner, not a fancy restaurant. Trent showed up in regular clothes, and Havisha laughed at how uncomfortable he looked without a suit. "This is who I am now," he said, gesturing at his jeans and casual shirt. "I like this version better." "Yes," she replied. The other one was too polished, too practiced. The other one was terrified of being real. They talked for hours over coffee that got cold and fries they forgot to eat. About his mother's death and how it had broken his father. About her years in foster care and the walls she'd built brick by careful brick. About Monaco and the miracle of finding each other again. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked, echoing the question he'd asked her that night. "I believe in second chances," he said, and being brave enough to take them. Trent was promoted to general manager at the Whitmore after increasing occupancy and guest satisfaction. It wasn't running a global empire, but watching him light up talking about guest experiences and staff development made Havisha realize he'd never been happy in his old life. "Guest told me today that this was the best hotel stay she'd ever had," he said one evening, grinning like a kid. "Not because of luxury or fancy amenities, because we remembered her name and asked about her day. That matters more than anything I did before." "You're building something real," Havisha said. "We're building something real," he corrected, taking her hand. Havisha was named Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery after successfully performing a series of complex procedures that other surgeons had deemed too risky. The promotion came with better hours, better pay, and the kind of professional respect she'd been chasing her entire career. "Dr. Leslie," her colleague said at the announcement, "I have to admit, I didn't think you'd make it back from maternity leave at full capacity. I was wrong." "Most people are," she replied coolly. "Women don't have to choose between motherhood and excellence. We just have to work twice as hard to prove it." The twins flourished with both parents present and happy. Jack's drawings became brighter, full of families holding hands and houses with doors wide open. Joe's behavioral issues disappeared entirely, the angry outbursts replaced with confidence and joy. One evening, Jack brought Trent a drawing of 4 people labeled Mama, Daddy, Jack, Joe. "We're a family now," Jack said simply. Trent's eyes filled with tears. "Yeah, buddy, we are." Joe was more direct. "Are you going to marry Mama?" "Joe!" Havisha said, mortified. "What?" "Emma's parents are married. If you're going to be our daddy forever, shouldn't you marry Mama?" "That's a good question," Trent said, his eyes meeting Havisha's over the boys' heads. "Maybe I should." One evening, while the boys built an elaborate blanket fort in the living room, Trent pulled Havisha aside into the kitchen. "I want to ask you something," he said, looking nervous in a way she'd never seen. "Okay, no ring, no grand gesture, just a question." He took both her hands, and she felt them trembling slightly. "I want to spend my life proving that families aren't born from perfection, but from choosing each other every single day. I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life. I want to help Jack with his art and teach Joe not to break things, or at least help fix what he breaks. I want messy and complicated and real. I want grocery store arguments and burnt dinners and all the ordinary moments that make a life. Will you marry me?" Havisha looked at this man who'd lost everything to find himself, who'd chosen them over empire, who read bedtime stories in funny voices and fixed leaky faucets and made her feel safe enough to tear down her walls, who'd proven that love wasn't about grand gestures, but about showing up every single day. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes to all of it." From the living room, they heard Joe yell, "She said yes." Mama said yes. They'd been listening the whole time. They married 3 months later, in a small ceremony at a community center, nothing like the society wedding Trent had been expected to have. Nia as maid of honor, Jack and Joe as ring bearers, a handful of friends who'd witnessed their journey. No media, no spectacle, just love spoken in vows that made everyone cry. Shavicia wore a simple dress she'd found on sale. Trent wore a suit he'd bought off the rack. Neither had ever felt more themselves. "I promise to choose you every day," Trent said, his voice thick with emotion. "Even when it's hard. Even when I'm scared. I promise to be the father our sons deserve and the partner you need. I promise to never let fear make my decisions again." "I promise to let you in," Havisha replied, her voice steady despite the tears. "To trust when my instincts scream to run. To build this life together instead of protecting myself alone. I promise to believe in us even when it's terrifying." Joe handed them the rings with excessive ceremony. Jack cried happy tears that made everyone else cry harder. When they kissed, their sons cheered, and Gavicia felt something settle in her chest. Peace, belonging, home. They bought a house together, not a mansion, but a home with a yard where the boys could play and rooms that held laughter instead of echoes. It needed work, which they did together. They painted walls the wrong colors and had to redo them. They assembled furniture wrong and laughed at the instructions. They burned dinner regularly and ordered pizza without shame. It was perfectly imperfect. Jack got his own space for drawing, walls he could cover with art. Joe got a backyard to run wild in, to climb trees and build forts. They got stability and love, and 2 parents who were present. Then Garrison's assistant called one morning, her voice quiet and careful. "Mr. Southey is dying, cancer. He has weeks, maybe less. He's asking to see you." Trent's first instinct was refusal, the wound still raw from his father's betrayal. But Havisha surprised him. "You should go," she said, "after everything he did. Not for him. For you, for closure, for the chance to be the bigger person." She took his hand. "And maybe give Jack and Joe a chance to meet their grandfather, even if it's brief. They deserve to make their own decision about him someday. What if I don't want them to know him? Then we tell them the truth when they're older and let them decide. But give them the chance to meet him. Death makes everything final." They visited Garrison in the hospital where Havisha worked, which felt like cosmic irony. He looked smaller than Trent remembered, shrunken by disease and regret, nothing like the imposing figure who'd ruled an empire. The machines keeping him alive beeped rhythmically, counting down his remaining time. Jack and Joe approached their grandfather with cautious curiosity. Unsure what to make of this frail stranger. "Are you really our grandpa?" Joe asked directly. Garrison's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, and I'm sorry I wasn't a better one." "That's okay," Jack said with the easy forgiveness of childhood. "Daddy says everyone makes mistakes," Garrison actually cried, seeing them. "They look like you did," he whispered to Trent, "before I ruined everything. Before I taught you that love was weakness." The boys stayed for only a brief visit. Hospitals were boring and they were restless, but it was enough. Enough for Garrison to see what he'd almost destroyed through control and pride. After they left with Havisha taking them to the cafeteria, Garrison gripped Trent's hand weakly. "I was wrong," he said, each word an effort, "about everything. I taught you that power mattered more than love. That empires were worth sacrificing humanity for. I made you into a smaller version of me, and then wondered why you were unhappy." He coughed, struggling for breath. "You were braver than I ever was. Walking away, choosing them, building something real instead of something impressive. I wish you'd figured that out sooner," Trent said, surprised to find forgiveness mixing with his anger. "Me too. I wish a lot of things." Garrison's eyes drifted closed, then opened again with effort. "Your mother would have been proud of you. She always said I'd lose you if I didn't learn to love without conditions. She was right about everything. You never talked about her after she died. Too painful. Easier to bury feelings under work than face them. That's what cowards do." He squeezed Trent's hand. "Don't be like me. Feel everything, even when it hurts. That's what makes you human. I'm trying. I'm proud of you. Not for the empire building or business success. For the man you became when you walked away from all of it. For choosing love over legacy." A tear slid down his weathered cheek. "I'm leaving everything to the boys. Let them decide what to do with it when they're old enough. Maybe they'll be wiser than I was. He died 2 weeks later, leaving his vast fortune to Jack and Joe in trust, with Trent and Havisha as administrators. The will included a letter apologizing for building walls instead of bridges, for teaching that power mattered more than love, for wasting years on empire instead of family. I hope you can forgive me, the letter ended. Not for my sake, I don't deserve it, but for yours. Forgiveness frees the forgiver. Trent read it in their kitchen while Havisha held him, and he cried for the father his dad could have been, and for the relationship they'd never have. He tried at the end. Havisha said softly, "That's something. It's not enough." "No, but it's something." On the twins' 6th birthday, they threw a party in their backyard. No catering, no hired entertainment, just family and friends and chaos. Children running wild, cake smashed everywhere. Laughter louder than music. Trent stood at the grill, attempting to cook burgers without burning them, watching Havisha laugh as Jack and Joe attacked her with water balloons. And he thought about that night in Monaco when he'd felt human for the first time. He'd been wrong. That night he'd only remembered what it felt like to be alive. This messy, chaotic, beautiful life they'd built from broken pieces, this was what it meant to be whole. Havisha caught his eye across the lawn, and her smile held everything they'd survived, everything they'd become. Joy and trust and love earned through choosing each other every single day. "You planning to stand there all day or help me?" she called, water dripping from her hair. He grinned and grabbed the hose, abandoning the burgers without care. Water flew everywhere. The boys screamed with delight. The yard became a war zone of laughter and joy. Nia took photos of the chaos, capturing moments of pure happiness. "This is everything," she said, wiping tears. "This is what it looks like when people choose love." And somewhere in the chaos, Trent realized the truth. The greatest love stories don't begin with perfection. They begin with one terrified step toward each other, then another, until distance becomes history and strangers become home. Later that night, after the guests had left and the boys were asleep, exhausted and happy, Trent and Havisha sat on their porch, watching the stars. "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" she asked. "Here in this house? Or here in this life?" Both." "No," he admitted. "That night in Monaco, I thought you'd be a beautiful memory. Nothing more. And now you're everything." He pulled her closer. "You, Jack, Joe, this life we built, it's better than anything I could have imagined. Even without the empire. Especially without the empire." He kissed her forehead. "I'd burn it all down again if I had to." "Good thing you don't have to." They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found each other twice, who'd chosen love over logic, who'd proven that family wasn't about DNA or wealth, but about showing up every single day and choosing each other. Inside the house, their sons slept peacefully, dreaming dreams that only children could dream. And outside, under the stars, two broken people who'd made each other whole held hands and planned a future that looked nothing like the past. It was perfect. It was real. It was theirs.